Então, bom dia a todos. Gostava de vos agradecer por terem vindo ao Seminário em Estatística e Ciência de Dados. Hoje nós temos o prazer de ter o professor John Byler. O John Byler, ele foi o fundador e é o atual chefe do Departamento de Estatística da Miami University, em Oxford, em Ohio. Ele é atualmente o presidente eleito do International Statistical Institute. Ele vai, em agosto, ele vai virar presidente durante os próximos 2 anos. O International Statistical Institute é a maior instituição internacional, a maior associação para estatísticos. Ele vai falar um pouco sobre isso também. Ele, anteriormente, já fez parte do Board of Directors da Associação Americana de Estatística. Ele faz bastante colaboração com vários pesquisadores em várias áreas e ele tem colaborado bastante com jornalistas num projeto que ele tem chamado Stats+Stories. Ele vai falar um pouco sobre isso também, que é essencialmente contar algumas histórias sobre como a estatística é útil no dia-a-dia. Ele participou de muitos comitês, quer no International Statistical Institute, quer na Associação Americana de Estatística, e temos um prazer imenso de o ter hoje connosco para o último seminário do semestre. John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So please, the floor is yours. Thank you again for accepting our invitation.
Oh, it's indeed my pleasure. Well, let me just dive right in. So thank you again for taking the time out to join me. I've got a quick outline here of some of the things I'd like to touch on. First is I'm going to start with discussion of a little confusion that often arises. Second, I'll give you a little bit of a commercial for the International Statistical Institute. And then I'll follow with some remarks related to the Stats+Stories project and podcast. Some early decisions we made, the evolution of it, and what the future might hold for this particular activity. For those of you that think about look at the web and engage in interactions there, you may have seen the abbreviation. Have you ever seen TLDR? Too long, didn't read, the summary of a paper or an email, or I think that for talk, perhaps there's the TBDL. It was too boring and didn't listen. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background sort of what the takeaway. One aspect of what we do is that I come to appreciate that journalists understand narrative and story, and people respond to stories. Statisticians, we understand variability and uncertainty and evidence in support of statements or conjectures. So, statisticians and journalists are a team that can lead to stories that will engage the community and reflect what is supported by data and what is not. And the last part of my summary of what the whole slide is going to do is, hey, I'd like to encourage you to join ISI and its associations to connect to your colleagues from around the world. So that's the too long didn't read or too boring didn't listen summary. In terms of confusion, a lot of people say, what, Miami University, Oxford, Ohio? So just to give you some context of what that means, if you look at this little map here, you'll see that in the red point there, that's where Oxford, Ohio is, and Miami, Florida is at the end at the white dot. So you can see that we're pretty far away in terms of where we're located. The University of Miami looks like this in the wintertime. It has, pine trees, very, very tropical in its look. In contrast, where I am, it looks like this in the wintertime. So you will not be confused by the University of Miami in the winter and Miami University in the winter. In fairness, right now, in the summer, it looks more like this. So just to give you some idea, Miami University is in Oxford, Ohio. It's an old state school in the U.S. It was founded in 1809. Just a little bit of background. Now, to go to the talk content, the ISI, the International Statistical Institute, is an old society. It was founded in 1853. In terms of its first conferences, in terms of an organization, it was 1885. Initially, it was 81 statisticians from government and academia that came together. The early work and focus of much of ISI was on official statistics. This is influencing agencies, facilitating collaboration, encouraging uniformity in statistical definition, although a lot of this has been taken over by the UN in recent years. After 1947, it was emphasizing international communication, thinking about promoting and disseminating research, and also the practice of statistics as being a focus and in particular areas of application by a family of associations, which range from survey statisticians, the first of these associations, to most recently the International Environmetric Society. Others include Bernoulli Society, the Statistical Computing, Official Statistics, StatEd, and Business and Industrial Statistics. And Paulo is involved in at least two of these to a pretty serious degree. The ISI has about 4,000 members, and you can join it lots of ways. One is you can be sponsored by 3 elected members and become an elected member. Anyone can join as a regular member or can join associations. There are other ways to join as institutional members, but the idea is that you're interested in promoting statistical science for a better world, and part of that is leading, supporting, and promoting our discipline, the understanding, development, and good practice of statistics worldwide. What are some of the things that we do? Well, part of this is the conference. So the World Stat Congress will be coming up this summer. There are publications like the International Statistical Review and Stat, which is the most recent journal, which is a smaller, intended for quick, shorter releases of work. There are awards that are supported, including the Pearson Prize, which is awarded every World Stat Congress. Professional ethics is a major part of what ISI will be promoting and advocating, and we will weigh in when there are times that we see our international colleagues that are being persecuted and at times prosecuted for promoting good statistical practice. We in the ISI collaborate with individuals at the UN Stat Division and part of their Stat Commission, and we've been very involved in capacity building in recent years, and that's opportunities for any to be involved. Recently, we've gotten involved in international partnerships and conferences such as regional conferences, or the first one being in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur, the second in Bali, Indonesia. There are 4 strategic priorities that ISI has, and I put in red on this slide some that have a stats and stories connection. The first strategic priority is to encourage statistical communication and networking. And while that's done between statisticians at things like WSCs and the World Stat Congress, the regional stat congresses, web, social media, and other outlets are ways that we try to connect broadly and beyond our current community, our statistical community. We also are interested in increasing the public voice of statistics. That's both the image of it, to be a champion for the value of good statistical thinking and reasoning, defending integrity of statistical practice and ethical standards, and then weighing in on topics such as politics and the media and the use and abuse of statistics. The statistical capacity work has recently focused on official statistics efforts and then also education and partnerships with colleagues around the world. And lastly, the final strategic priority that's of interest in work at the ISI is going to be thinking about our sustainability, our financial situation, which is any organization is going to consider. The World Stat Congresses, while the first was in Rome in 1887, the most recent one will be, the next one will be in a month or so, which will be in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. The next one, 2 years hence, is going to be in The Hague, the Netherlands, and that's going to be in mid-July. So you can start your plans now for the invited session you'd like to organize or your travel and participation. So that's the end of the infomercial. You can think about this as in the movies, there's always trailers of coming attractions. I think of the World Stat Congress as a coming attraction for those of us that are in the statistical community that are interested in connecting and collaborating with our colleagues around the world. I want to start with some acknowledgements. First and foremost, I'd like to mention Richard Campbell, who has been with me from the start of this journey that helped partner and co-found the Stats+Stories podcast. Currently, our moderator is Rosemary Pennington, and she has been involved for more than a majority of the episodes that we've produced. We've had audio engineers, Steve Beitzel and Charles Blades, and Ringo Jones have been involved. We've had logistics help. We've had a producer, Charles Blades, that was recently hired, and colleagues that have assisted with the website production, the podcast production, our first moderator, Bob Long, and you know, not a cast of thousands, but a cast of enough people that you know, I want to make sure that I give them proper credit and appreciation, because when you do a project like this, it's not something you do on your own. It's something that you do with others. So in terms of history and context, to start, you know, what would possibly lead to a partnership between a statistician and a journalist? And the simple answer is, well, interest, time, and it's fun. I mean, we all are looking for new challenges in our career, and well, many of us are, and we're open to opportunities. And some of that opportunity is where you are and what you're doing. At my university, we discussed the idea of a general quantitative literacy requirement, which is that's the QL consideration there. A quantitative literacy requirement would be what is it that an undergraduate student would need to know to be thought of as quantitatively literate? I think all of us would support and promote the idea of a numerate citizenry. We want citizens and participants in activity in our society to be able to be consumers of information, critical consumers of information. And one aspect of doing that is, how do we do that broadly? I mean, we have humanities students that are studying, you know, lots of different things that have very low statistical, numeric, quantitative content, but yet they are going to be operating in this world with the need of being able to be consumers and then decision makers with quantitative arguments coming to them. As part of that, we developed a course that we called News and Numbers, which was an honors course that we team taught. So Richard Campbell, the journalist, and I team taught this class as a proof of concept. The idea that you can do something like this, a quantitative literacy class for a humanities audience. At the same time I was doing this, I started getting more involved with the American Statistical Association and the International Statistical Institute. I was involved in the council at that time, and I was on the ASA board of directors. And the first World Statistics Day was coming up. So this led me to think about, what is it that could be done that we could do to celebrate kind of the World Statistics Day and the idea of promoting the visibility of our discipline outside of our departments, outside of an audience that already appreciates what we do and why we do it. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to help the community at large understand that there's depth to complicated stories. You know, it's more than the headline that leads you to click on a story. You know, there's some depth, and and you need to have some critical understanding to be able to judge whether there's truth in this story. So we were thinking, well, who do we want to reach out to? And we thought journalists, statisticians, obviously, our respective communities, the general public, students and teachers of introductory statistics and more. I've had as a sidebar comment, I've had the fun experience of my niece and my nephew both telling me that their teachers have been listening to it and have been advocating it, and in fact assigned a homework assignment that was to listen to one of the Stats and Stories episodes. So that was kind of neat. The inspiration, when we start something like this, we often think about models. Who would be an inspiration for us? And Freakonomics was a partnership between economists and writers talking about behavioral economics. It's really brilliant. Science Friday with Ira Flato has been a decades-long activity that was on public radio in the United States, and it was a great way that new scientific results were being highlighted for the larger community. National Public Radio, that's the NPR, had something called Car Talk, where they were talking about a technical idea of repairing cars or changes in that, but it was done with a light touch. So the idea that it wasn't always serious, that it was fun. The model that we thought about initially was there was a news report in the U.S. called Nightline. And we thought, well, is that something that we could do something similar to that? What we did is we started thinking about how we were going to produce this. We ended up trying to find, well, even things like background music. We had to make decisions, who's going to be on the air, what would be topics for episodes. Well, how would we produce this? So we made the decision to go with a moderator and 2 panelists and a guest. So it would be like a roundtable conversation featuring the guests, with the highlighting and inquiring about the guest's interests and background and area of expertise. We wanted episodes to be kind of fun and also serious, a mix. If it was timely, all the better. So things that were time sensitive are ones that we wanted to make sure we could get them to air quickly. After the fact, we had to produce the audio files, we had to update websites, push this to iTunes, and then think about how we would promote it. Initially, we had all of our guests in the studio. In the top left of this image, you can see the 3 of us, Richard Campbell in the near right, then Bob Long is hidden by microphones in the far right, and then me on the far left, and then one of our guests, that's Trevor Butterworth, in the near left. And that would be the way that we were doing this recording, because we had an old radio station studio that we had access to on our campus. The other guests that you see here include, Regina Nuzzo, who's now doing some work for the ASA, who's a professor at Gallaudet, and then a colleague who's Terrence Moore, who was a sports writer, and Michael Cabaz, who was a vice president for enrollment management at a university, talking about what students should think about when they're going to be going to university, or what do universities do when they're selecting students. What are some of the analytics of being enrolled and selected for a university? Initially, in February 2013, we had our first guest in the studio, and it was someone from the census, and we recorded this. And we were very scripted in how we approached this problem. When you're scripted, though, it ends up coming out a little bit stale. One of the things that we found is that when we sent it out for comment, that people said we were too much technical jargon, that if you have a really long comment and responses, it leads to what someone accused us of doing, was inducing ear fatigue. And I thought, break my heart. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to engage. I would encourage those of you that are teachers. How many of you go into your classrooms and have your classroom experience being that you're basically reading from a script? None of us are doing that. What you often are doing is having an outline of what you want to address as part of your classes, and then you're filling in based upon the exchange that you have with your classes. So we were learning as we were going on. We ended up thinking about how do we coordinate flow of conversation, and how do we deal with jargon in the class. So the moderator ended up coordinating kind of the flow of the conversation, and the jargon was mainly holding each other accountable. So in a technical audience, you could say, we check this model for adequacy, but that for the journalists in the crowd may say, what do you mean? Why did you do that? You fit a model? What does that mean to fit a model? So there was this kind of pushback, because there are things that we know that we use in our language that's natural to us, but to a more general audience may not come out in the same way. What we ended up doing is we made sure that there were transcriptions for everything that we did. So our episodes, while we're recording them, we had them all typed up and available. There are good reasons for doing that. One is accessibility, that the student, we wanted to make sure that anyone could get access to this. Another benefit for having the transcription available is that individuals who have English as a second language may be more comfortable at times with reading the transcription, or having that as a complement to listening to the episode, that we thought, well, that's a good thing to do. So we ended up doing transcription. We posted episodes to web pages. We ended up getting an account with Apple Podcasts. That was our initial start. And we started having a social media presence through the @Stats+Stories Twitter handle. And I encourage you to follow and to retweet and do other things to help us promote. We also now send out broadcast emails to interested folks. We wanted to get some data about what we were doing. Unfortunately, iTunes subscriptions couldn't track it. The Google Analytics that we put on our website give us some information. SoundCloud now gives us much more. So we're in better shape than we were in terms of getting data about who is listening and how many are listening. When we would get ready for a guest to come on, we would have to get bio sketches, have titles. We even had questions for person on the street. Before the guests arrived, we had to have travel arrangements. It was really something to do. That it was a lot of work if we were trying to get people in place. We ended up modifying that as we started to go to a digital solution, a remote solution. In the same way, I'm not standing before you, but we're having a technical solution where you're able to share slides with me and you're able to listen to a presentation. Now, I mean, I would much rather be right now with you in terms of seeing your faces and interacting with you, but at times this is not a bad solution. You can do things in ways that you couldn't otherwise, both in terms of frequency of hosting guests, or whether it's seminars like this or episodes of Stats and Stories like we do. But we had to but early on we had to do much more work. We also had a release form because we were going to be putting someone's voice onto the public. You know, we're going to be sharing it. So we had our guests sign releases, and we ended up doing that. So that's kind of what we did for running out the episode. And then when we were done, we ended up with a release. Now, early on, our releases were kind of sporadic, you know, maybe every 6 to 8 weeks, because it takes a lot to bring someone in, host them, do the episode, do all the production, and then get it ready to roll. We ended up we have social media that we were getting contacts with the College of Arts and Science, that's CAS, my local media, the university did as well, and colleagues outside of the university. We had a website. Not the most attractive website in retrospect, but not a bad website. I mean, this is one, you know, episode 63, back before we started going to our when we hired a producer and updated this. And you can see that, you know, we had enough there that you could see a picture of the guest, you could stream the episode, you play it directly from the website, or you could subscribe to it via the podcast. But then, in the middle of 2018, something really exciting happened for us when we partnered with the American Statistical Association. The president of Barry Nussbaum was really interested in promoting statistical communication to the larger community. And one aspect of doing that is he remembered being a guest on our program. He had one time been the chief statistician for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And he showed up on an early episode of Stats and Stories when he visited. And he thought, you know, they're already doing this. Maybe we can partner. And so the American Statistical Association ended up helping support us in terms of hiring a part-time producer, a budget for transcriptions, helped us connect to other speakers, and we ended up promoting the program. This has evolved into a connection with the Significance magazine, which is a joint American Statistical Association, Royal Statistical Society publication, and we've managed to select and have conversations with guests who have certain papers being featured in an issue of Significance. And we've moved to more regular releases. We ended up moving from 6 weeks or approximately to every 2 weeks. One of the things that we also did at the time, Science Friday, that the podcast, the show that I mentioned, the National Public Radio show, visited my university, and I had a chance to talk to their producer and to the host. And one of the suggestions that they made was, you know, you got to get to more regular releases. And so bi-weekly was one step towards that, but even more regular was part of it. And then also thinking about updating our website. So we found a way to connect to our local public radio. In the U.S., there's National Public Radio, and you can get on their NPR podcast directory. So we were able to do that. And we ended up changing our website and to evolve to this form. You can see there'll be a carousel of images, there'll be a list of topics, and you see here it ranges from economics, education, entertainment, environment, health, media, methods, politics, sports, and society. These are kind of just the crude categorization, but it allowed for people to be able to interact with the show in a different kind of way. We also managed to have different ways of connecting. I don't know how many of you out there are podcast listeners. You know, if I were standing face to face, I'd ask you to hold up your hands. I mean, you can hold up your hands now and then let your other friends see it, but I can't appreciate it. But now you can get to us through SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher, Overcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. There's lots of ways of finding us. We also then moved to a different, more modern brand, our logo is now, looks like this, the Stats and Stories. The idea, we moved our backlog, all of our programs are now on SoundCloud, and we're now more active in Twitter. And in fact, our producer is tweeting more often than I am from the Stats and Stories podcast. Getting a new moderator, Rosemary Pennington, she had public radio and podcast experience. She's in the journalism faculty at my university. Replacing Bob Long has been great. She's been an unbelievable addition. Bob was wonderful as well. The partnership with ASA gave us this ability to really expand. We also said, if we're going to try to do more regular releases, the Stats and Stories format, which was about 27 to 30 minutes for an episode, we said, that's hard to do every week. We thought, what about a stats? And we introduced the idea of Stats and Short Stories, which was going to be a 7-minute plus or minus episode. So we thought about other ways that we could find a way to keep a more frequent release of what we were doing, but yet not kill us, because this is not part of any of our normal responsibilities. This is something that we're doing just for love. I mean, it's something that we really enjoy. In terms of how the frequency of episodes, you can see that in 2013 we did a whopping 3, and now we're up to 2019 looking at 52 as kind of where we are. So the growth has been dramatic, and I credit our friends at the American Statistical Association, their partnership in helping us bootstrap this. The other part that I credit this is the technical solution that has allowed us to have remote guests join us. Since now, almost with rare exception, probably 90% of our guests are virtual. Occasionally, we'll still have people in the studio, but that's pretty rare. We're trying to get one episode released per week, and we got to do this with an external transcription. We used to have students doing all the transcription, student workers in my department. We were hiring to basically type up our episodes so that we could have that. So it's, that's been a major change, and it's allowed us to do this with frequency. So the question is anybody listening? Does anybody care? So what you can see is this is a little bit of a snapshot of kind of interest, and this is recently, this is like within the last couple of months, a snapshot of what was occurring. And as you look at this window, you can see that on days of release, we have a spike of listening. And then they're still listening throughout the week, although it tends to dissipate some. And that's about what one might expect. Which of the episodes are doing well? They're all doing relatively well. I mean, this gives you an idea of kind of the top row are fairly, were episodes 89 through 91. The bottom row were 65, 66, and 70. And these are, SoundCloud gives us information about people that have listened to at least a couple of minutes, at least 2 minutes of listening to an episode before it triggers a count that, yep, someone listened. So, among the set, the Explaining Bayes Better episode ended up with more than 1,200 people that listened to it, versus like the Forensic Scientific, Making It Scientific, that was about 778. So, those numbers will change with time. The better, we ran a contest. That was something we tried, that was ways to generate interest. We said, okay, can you explain Bayes better? And you had to do it with a title. So you were limited to about, I think it was 30, I can't remember. We had a constraint on how long the title could be. And then you could have a lead sentence. You had to have that had to be the way you sold it. And so we ran this competition for about a month, and then we had the episode where we did it, and we ended up growing our Twitter following, the number of people following it, from, it was about 400 before we started these episodes. Now we've geared it up to almost 1,200 after doing things like this Better Bayes contest, which ended up really giving us a good jump. We had some fun things. We had 44 people that entered something, one ranging from the headline, "You Bet Your Posterior," to Bayes analysis, meaning counting possibilities. So people went from trying to have fun with it to a little more serious. And then you saw that the lead sentence, and often were sentences, and then ended up with some description, so from book cover clues, plot lines construed. Bayesian analysis tell us you can't always judge a book by its cover, but you can do pretty good if you're reasonably well read. So, you know, that trying to how do you communicate the idea of prior belief and data and then posterior conclusions based on that prior belief. And so that was, people were having fun with it, and we had fun too. And then we asked, Carrie Mengerson was the stat guest that ended up leading us to having this episode. And then we had a judge who was Carrie, and then a journalist. And the winner kind of didn't do what we had asked them to do. They ended up doing something even cooler. They said they submitted a haiku. So Steve Ziliak submitted the haiku: Bayesian method, making stuff you partly know link that with what you don't. Frequentist methods fear the null hypothesis and large p-values. It pays to go Bayes, epistemologically obvious and prior. So he just decided for this more artistic, creative, poetic way of trying to release, but it was just fun. I mean, we were trying to engage our community and thinking about how do we communicate. And I would challenge all of you to think about communicating Bayes methods in a headline and a lead sentence or two. That's, you know, that kind of challenge is something you could give to your classes to think about how do they present what they do to a more general audience in a quick way that engages. Is anybody listening? Well, in terms of is anybody listening, we've had, you know, from episode 64, this was a snapshot a few episodes ago. Most of our listeners are in the U.S., and not surprisingly, given our base and the partnership with the American Statistical Association, although you see that colleagues in Brazil still are engaged, and we have you know, that ended up being number 5 in terms of listening. So this is a quick look at kind of who's been connecting with our program. Now, if you're saying, well, I've never listened, where might I start? I added a little bit of suggestion here. Brad Efron, who won the second international prize in statistics, was a guest on episode number 72. And he's just a delightful gentleman to speak with, and you might enjoy that conversation. David Spiegelhalter, former Royal Stat Society president, was a guest on 3 episodes. Most recently, number 76 was the Statistics of the Year episode from 2018, which was a lot of fun. It's a competition that the Royal Stat Society does. The director of the UN Stat Commission, Stefan Schweinfest, was also a guest. So if you're, you know, that's kind of a general issue and general interest. In terms of other statistical issues, I'd recommend, like, Nicole Lazar, episode 93, touched on, I believe your first seminar in this series had Ron Wasserstein as a guest. And so Nicole's episode is complementary to that. For those of you that are interested in R's use and R's application, you know, Hadley Wickham and Nick Team were talking directly about R. Hadley a little bit more about the data science workflow. Nick about the 25th anniversary of R. Julia Silge talked about text mining in R and her work with that, which those were all very fun. Alberto Cairo is a journalist who does a lot with data visualization, and his episode his conversations with them are featured in episodes 42 and 43. Sharon Hesney wrote something with the New York Times about, you know, what's going on in this graph, which might be a teaching tool that some of you might find interesting. Economics and social and official statistics are featured in others. I've heard that there are some in Brazil that are interested in soccer. Is that true, Paulo?
Can you say that again?
I said I've heard that there are a few people in Brazil that are interested in soccer. Is that true? You know,
that are interesting.
Yeah, no, that would be interesting.
Actually, the Brazilian national team yesterday they won for the South American Cup, so they just moved to the semifinals.
Very good. I was saying that partially in jest because I know that it is very serious there, and I was in fact rooting for the Brazilian women's team, but alas, France managed to sneak through in the Women's World Cup. But there's an episode with Luke Bourne, who was the director of analytics for AS Roma before he moved to a basketball analytics position. If you're interested in music, there's a new movie coming out today related to Beatles music, And Mark Glickman had an analysis dealing with authorship of Beatles songs that were in question about whether Paul McCartney or John Lennon wrote particular ones. There are a series of episodes on data journalism that might be of broad interest to you and your colleagues. If you're thinking about areas of application, everything from antibiotic resistance to gerontology and frailty, to mapping and spatial methods, to forensic evidence such as crime, to conflict resolution, to health, climate change, the environment, sports, substance abuse. We've had so many, just a host of these. It was fun for me to go back and preparing for this talk to reflect on some of the things that we've done and the topics that we've touched on. This is where we've done. This gives you a selection. We've got more coming up. We're going to do one with Yoav Benjamini, who's the Pearson Prize winner this year. He'll be coming up in a future episode. He'll talk about some of the ideas of false discovery rates and what that might mean, and how do you understand why that contribution was so important. So that, for those of you that have never listened to any episodes, this gives you at least a little bit of an overview. Now, what's next? We haven't changed what we want. We want to promote good reporting and good statistical thinking. That's still part of what we're considering. We dream big. We might have 1,100 followers and about a $25,000 a year budget, roughly. Science Friday that I mentioned, they have 768,000 followers. I don't think we're going to get to 750,000 followers, but we might increase, and they have a $20 million budget annually. That's a little bit different. I don't think we're going to get there either. I don't know that we want to, but the idea is that there isn't an opportunity to grow reporting on technical work. I mean, Science Friday shows that with science. I think there's this opportunity with statistics and data science. Within ISI, one of the things that I've been doing is I've been talking to some of my colleagues about thinking about building a new special interest group, maybe a special interest group on communicating statistics and data science. And we might do this in partnership with our friends at the American Statistical Association. So I think that's on my mind. That's something that I think is an opportunity that we might be able to pursue. We're in a context now where some of the public are almost viewing opinion as fact, that people are getting their source of news from this echo chamber that's only showing them what they already might believe. There's assertions of fake news without critical response or critical reaction to it. How can we address this? How can we help equip people? I mean, perhaps if we're successful, we can think of this as an inoculation, or if we can help inoculate the public to fall ill under the impact of this these assertions of fake news without some kind of critical assessment and review, we'd be happy. Short term, we're still, there's still a little bit of hustling for resources. That's the idea of revenue for supporting a full-time producer, the corporate sponsors, others. We might identify other partners. Maybe we're thinking about other ways to engage the listeners. I'd love to see broader reach of our program and our efforts. I mean, I think that we're consistently getting 800 to 1,200 listeners for every time we do a program. That's not bad. I think we might find ways to expand the visibility, and maybe partnering with others. There was the idea of Report for America, an activity that was potentially funded that we might look at. Another thing that we might do, or we could do, is think about how would we internationalize stats and stories. Is there a Portuguese version of Stats and Stories that's waiting to emerge? Where would you begin if you were interested in doing this? Perhaps collaborating with some journalism colleagues, maybe involving some of your students in an effort to do this, maybe hosting colleagues to talk about the interesting work that they do, and then find a way of doing it more generally. I mean, what would it take to do this? I think it's just time and interest. And so I'm asking, perhaps, who among you would begin this new statsandstories.br webcast? Maybe there's one that's sitting in the audience now or listening more remotely. I'll close with muito obrigado to Paulo Rodriguez for the invitation to join you today, for the Federal University of Bahia for sponsoring this seminar series, and you, I mean, those of you that are sitting there or those of you that are joining remotely, for taking time for your busy schedules to participate. I know it's near the end of your semesters and it's a busy time, so I thank you for your time and your attention. And I also want to thank you for being part of the worldwide statistical community, both in Brazil and as part of ISI and its family of associations. And finally, for listening to Stats and Stories, following us on Twitter, and supporting partnerships between statisticians, journalists, and the public. It's been a delight to be here and join you. And if you're interested in contacting me, here's information. But I'll stop my screen sharing now and open it up for questions.
John, thank you very much for your very nice presentation. I will turn on the camera. You can see some of our colleagues and students. So I can now open the floor for discussion and questions. If you have any question, you can make it in Portuguese and I can translate if you wish.
Okay.
So if I might start while people think, I have heard a few times, I was advised actually, maybe you were one of the persons that told me that it could be advisable to have some kind of course on communicating with journalists and these kind of things. So because it is indeed a big challenge to communicate and to, if we are pure statisticians, how do we communicate with other people so that they can understand? So which kind of advice would you suggest for younger people to communicate results to someone that is out of the field?
That's a really good question, and it's one thing, it's very different to write for different audiences. I mean, I think that when I think about our students and the education for our students, you have to be trained to be able to communicate technically to other people in your discipline. And that's sort of our default position. But you also have to be trained to be able to work in teams. I mean, how many of you work with people that are not statisticians? I mean, I think that if you're going to do any kind of applied work and collaborative work, it's going to be with someone who's not technical. They may not be the general public, but there's certainly a lay audience relative to statistical background and preparation and training. So you are going to have to find ways to communicate to make a method accessible and results meaningful to your collaborators. Do you teach classes that are consulting classes as part of your programs?
Well, we have a consultancy project, but we don't teach class on that. We have actually something that we have just started here was a junior company, which essentially is made up by students and a professor, which is a supervisor. And the idea is exactly that: is to make them get projects and give some kind of feedback for some kind of work, of consultancy work. So this is something that we are starting right now.
I guess at one level, to think about, to do communication, you have you get better at it by doing it. Mm-hmm. You get better at speaking in public by speaking in public. You get better at writing by writing. So, find ways to engage. Talk to your colleagues in journalism and ask them if they're going to do this. Talk to your students. Do you have a student newspaper?
I don't think we do. No.
Okay, but I was going to say, find ways that you can partner outside of your discipline. Have with your student consultancy company, or find a way to say, okay, have them partner with graduate students and other disciplines to help them with the analyses that they're doing. That way it's kind of this peer partnership and collaboration. I think that can be healthy. In terms of resources, if you were going to develop kind of an introduction kind of class, this is kind of a really nice source that I would encourage. Joel Best has a book called Stat Spotting, A Guide to Dubious Data. It's a field guide to identifying dubious data. That's a nice resource. One of the classics in the field is News and Numbers, and that's by Victor Cohn and Lewis Cope wrote this originally. That's a great source, and I've used that in the questions from that book when I teach some of the introductory classes, because I tell my classes, you should be able to answer these questions for someone. I mean, you should be able to answer these for a public. If you should be able to explain this in a way that these journalist questions would be answered. So one of the things that you could do is think about any of your modeling classes, have them write up the technical report, and maybe have one assignment in the course of their thing, write this up as if you were going to write this for a newspaper. Mm-hmm. What's the headline and what's the lead sentence? Sort of hold them to writing in a different way, and maybe get a journalism colleague to respond to it.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks. Any question?
Fala comigo. A partir da experiência dele, que outras sugestões ele daria para quem queria começar o podcast? Dentro dos episódios que divulgou, vamos ver qual foi que percebeu que teve, qual o tema que teve o maior interesse?
John, there is a question here from one of our master students. He's asking if someone would like to start a podcast, what kind of just very basic and beginner advice you will do. And the second question was, which was the topic that got more attention from the Stats and Stories that you have made so far.
Okay, so in terms of starting a podcast, one of the things that I was really lucky, because we had a studio here and I had technical partners. So I had computing resource people. But there are people that do podcasts by themselves, that they self-produce. And it's not that the price of entry is not that high. If you do go to your favorite web browser and type, just start searching. Roger Peng, P-E-N-G, and Hillary Parker have a podcast called Not So Standard Deviations. He is a biostatistician at Johns Hopkins. That's another podcast I'd recommend you looking at. But he has posted on some of the things that he's used in terms of building out his podcast. So what I would recommend is just doing a browser search for requirements for podcasts or starting new podcasts. And in terms of most popular podcasts, some of the one that we did, the R-based one with Hadley Wickham, was very popular. Some of the ones that we've done, like the one with Brad Efron and David Spiegelhalter, were also very popular. Explaining Days Better also. So I mean, we're getting to a point that there's not as much spiking in terms of an episode, because there's kind of a core listener group. So we're starting to see more stability in that.
Eu queria saber se o estúdio que ele grava o podcast é do departamento dele, da universidade, e se ele teve dificuldades para ganhar autorização para gravar.
Okay, so one of the questions from one of our colleagues is whether the studio where you record your broadcasts, if it belongs to the university or to the department, and whether it was hard to get permission to use it.
So it's in the university, and it's part of the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film. And it helps that my colleague Richard Campbell was the chair of that department.
Right.
and I'm chair of the statistics department. So all of a sudden, the fact that the Department of Statistics was paying for transcription and the Department of Journalism was sponsoring, helping with the time of the engineers. So we were fortunate that way. But you don't need to have that to do it. Like the first question, you can do this with technology that you have available to you now. I mean, you need something that probably has pretty good audio. But what we do that's helpful is we can have quality. We can edit for quality. So if we're talking, how often do you go, all the pauses that you might have, you can edit that out. And so what our producer does after the shows is tightens up the program, and that makes it I think it helps a lot. And that's so the post-processing is if you're going to do this on your own, you're going to have to do some of that post-processing to clean up an episode.
Thanks. Any more questions?
So I have a question for you.
Oh, you do?
Can I take a selfie with you guys?
Yes, sure. Can you see everyone there? Okay.
Yeah, can you lean in? It's a long way from Brazil to here.
It is. I have never seen such a far reach.
Already? This is like... So thank you very much.
And please send it to me and I will share it around.
I've never gotten to do a selfie with people that are thousands of miles away.
Yes,
so I thought,
I have never even considered that possibility.
And now I'll tweet this out, and I'll say,
okay, right. So if someone wants the picture, they should follow Stats and Stories, right?
They say this is part of this. This is my master plan, Paulo. I'm going to take over the podcast world.
I see. Okay, John. We will not take any more of your time. We know that you have plenty of things to do. So, but it was really, really a great pleasure to have you with us. It is always a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to meet you again personally in Kuala Lumpur.
Me too. Well, it's been my delight. Thank you so much. And I wish the students good luck on your exams next week. And I wish the professors fast grading.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.